Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Cheryl Welbeck. I'm the project manager for Directors of Health Promotion and Education. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, which is Sustainability Through Grants. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. Today's webinar is presented by your Category B partners, DHPE and SOFI. It's brought to you as part of training and support provided under the National Implementation and Dissemination for Chronic Disease Prevention Initiative, or Partnering for Health. Today's webinar will be recorded and archived for later viewing. We'll send a link out to you later along with the slides. We'd like to ask you to hold your questions until the end of today's presentation. To the right of your screen, you should see a control panel. The control panel has sections for questions and also a chat feature. If you have questions for today's presenter, you can type them into the question box. If you have any technical issues such as audio or disturbances with the video or visual portion, you can send me a note through the chat function. As a reminder, this is part one of a two-part series on sustainability related to funding. Part two of the webinar was originally scheduled for next Thursday, which is October 29. However, we're going to be rescheduling that, so we will send information to you for the rescheduled date, which will be November 12th. So I'd like to welcome today's speaker. Today's speaker is Dr. Susan F. Geckler of DHPE. She's a former CDC project officer and recipient of federal, state, foundation, and corporate grants. And as the CEO of a professional association, she's worked with both individuals and in teams to locate and prepare numerous grant proposals. She's also taught grant seeking and grant writing at the graduate level. So Susan, welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I want to talk initially about the idea of sustainability and not get into the grant seeking as the very first thing, but it's not too early now to start thinking about the sustainability of your projects. You're going to be putting a lot of effort, you are putting a lot of effort into this, and it would be a shame that at the end of 1 year, it just dies on the vine. You're creating coalitions, you want them to continue, and I think CDC and those of us that are the funded organizations also want them to continue. That these are investments in the long-term health of your community. And that's why we're using policy, environment, and systems change approaches. If you think about grants and you think about what are sources of funding for health promotion programs, I want to think that there are other things besides grants, and we'll talk about a few of those and then we'll get into the grants. But not to think about them as the only thing. If you are a government agency, and some have some government support, then taxes can be a source of funds for health promotion programs, either directly or indirectly. So for instance, the money that comes from CDC ultimately comes from taxes. Another is user fees. So is there something that you are doing for which you could charge a fee? That people would be willing to pay for, perhaps something that stores would be willing to pay for, that you are a service that you are providing. Sales of products. So if you develop an actual product, say a database of providers or something like that, it might be that that's something that you sell. Another is dues. If you are a membership organization, so for instance, the American Planning Association, American Heart Association, the National WIC Association, all have members who either make contributions in heart or pay dues. So that might be another source of revenue. You can do fundraising events. My guess is that some of you have. If you are with American Heart Association, the Heart Association does a lot of fundraising events. It may not be in your job, but it is something that your organization does and does quite well. Donations. Again, the Heart Association gets a lot of donations from people, particularly people who are affected by the heart disease or stroke and want to make a contribution. And then grants. So grants can be from many sources. There are federal grants. There are also grants from states. There are grants from foundations or the philanthropic community. And there is also corporate giving. So I want to encourage you that when we're talking about grant seeking, that you think broadly about what opportunities there might be in your community, what opportunities there might be in your state. And if you are not already connected with people in your state health department, I would encourage you to do that. And if you need to get contacts in your state health agency, DHPE is well positioned to help with making those contacts and making those introductions, because our members, our dues-paying members, are people who work in state health agencies on health promotion in the types of work that you're doing. So, grant seeking. So if you decide that grant funding is the way you want to go to try to get some sustainability that for the financial part of your work, it involves three aspects. There's the prospecting, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Then there's also writing the proposal, and that's what the second part of the workshop, the second webinar, is going to address. And then the packaging, it's putting it together, all the forms, all the appendices, the budgets, and all of that to make sure that it's a complete package. And that will probably be a little bit at the end of the writing webinar. So today we want to focus on prospecting and talk a little bit about how do you go about it and where might you look. So the first thing in prospecting is you want to find out who is funding what. And we'll talk some about how you can do that, but part of it is talking to others in the community that are getting some funds, finding out who is providing those funds. That can be one source of that. Another is that you need to clarify what is unique about your organization. Why should anyone fund you instead of funding someone else? What do you have to offer that no one else has? That should be part of your mission. And if it's not, then maybe you need to relook at the mission of the organization. Another tip is to travel widely and get connected. So are there events in your community or in your state where people who are likely to congregate? It might be fundraisers for another organization. It could be or a benefit. It could be that it's through a civic organization like Kiwanis or JCs or something like that. It could be through the faith community. It could be getting involved in your children's school. It can be patronizing local establishments. Sometimes beauty shops and barber shops, you're sitting around those, you hear what people are talking about, and it's amazing what kinds of connections sometimes occur. So getting to know your community and getting known in your community. And I'm sure some of you do that very well and already have great connections. I find that sounding out a funder on an idea before writing the proposal is often very beneficial. If a funder cannot talk to you, I mean, if it's against their processes or procedures, they will tell you that up front. But many are very open to that. And if they don't think that your idea is something that really works for them, they might suggest how you might massage the idea or they might suggest some other source that would work better for you. Um, Being open to the suggestions, you have to realize that not everyone you might approach is going to say yes or meet your idea with enthusiasm. But if you find a good match, it's just like dating, you finding a good partner, a good match, then often the writing works quite well. Getting copies of successful proposals. If you can find somebody else who was funded by an organization that you're interested in seeking funding from, often those are available online at the location of the website of the funder. If not, you can sometimes ask if you know that someone else is funded. You could ask if you could see a copy of their proposal. Some people are very willing to share that. Others are concerned that you might be a competitor and they might not. But since they've already got funding, unless they're also competing for new funding, they might be very happy to share it with you. These are obviously the applications that did get funded, so it's something about them worked for the funder. Being realistic. Having an idea of the kinds of things that a particular funder is interested in, and also the scope of what they are interested in. What level of funding are they going for? Are most of their grants at the $5,000 level, or most of them at the $250,000 level? If most of them are at the $5,000 level and you go in for one at a $250,000, unless you've talked to them in advance and they have encouraged you to apply for something at that magnitude, then it's probably not going to work. Or if your plans are too grandiose and really beyond the scope of what you could probably do with the amount of money that you're requesting, or that the funder would be likely to be interested in, then it's probably not going to go too far. And also being realistic about what your capacity is to deliver. Getting a grant that you can't actually do the work for might look great on paper, but if you fail at the deliverables, then that's going to make it much harder in the future to get funding. It gives a bad taste in the mouth of the funders, and it can bankrupt an organization. I worked one time with an organization that had made a proposal to do a certain level of work. They were not keeping track of their expenditures. The contract was for a certain amount, and at the end of the project they came back and said, well, but it actually cost us this much, and said, well, sorry, we didn't contract for that, and they actually went out of business as a result of a good project. Involve your target audience. If you know that you want to reach, for instance, women of breastfeeding age, or you want to engage people who are in the local downtown community of businesses because you want to do a complete streets project, you need to engage them early on before you're actually writing the proposal. Is your idea realistic? Are they on board? Are they willing to support it? What ideas do they have? It needs to, they need to have ownership as well as you, or it will not be successful. So, you've got some tips. Now, how do you get started? So the first thing is, I mentioned about what's your niche. Who are you? And there are really three categories of grant-seeking organizations generally. They're grassroots organizations, and I think many of you fit into that. There can be social service agencies, which are providing direct support to individuals a lot of times, and advocacy groups. So groups that are trying to change policy, and they have to be careful sometimes about sources of funding that they could apply for if they are going to be, depending on what kind of advocacy, whether they're going to be doing lobbying or not. So who you are, what kind of organization are you? Then a second question is, why do you want funding? What, so is there some problem that you're trying to solve? What ideas do you have for how to go about solving it, and how much might that cost? These are all important considerations before you even start looking for a funding source. Funders are giving money away because they have a mission also. They want to, in some way, make the world a better place. And if their interest is in the arts community, and your interest is in doing something on obesity prevention, chances are they're not going to be interested no matter how worthy it is. So you need to know what your problem is, what it is you're addressing, and find a match with a potential funder who might have an interest in that problem. What do you want to do to solve it? Well, there are different approaches, obviously, to issues of obesity. There can be approaches that relate to intake of calories. There can be ones on expenditures of calories. There can be things that work in other ways also, and whether it's working on an individual level or working in the policy, environment, and systems change type of approach. So having some idea of what you want to do to solve the issue that you have identified also can help direct you to the right kinds of funders. And then how much might that cost? Again, knowing the level at which funders typically provide funding helps you get a good match, or helps you decide, well, maybe they would fund the coalition, but they're not going to fund this project that the coalition might want to do. So there can be grants that are for more administrative management. They're sometimes a little harder to find than the ones that are for actually doing a project, but it's important also that you have the infrastructure. So, and there are obviously different price tags, and sometimes you might chunk it, so you might be 2 or 3 different funding sources, and sometimes you can leverage one to get another if they want matching. Sometimes it's just that you take your solution and say, well, this part of it, I'm going to look this for funding from this type of entity, and here I'll go for another entity. Maybe a corporate sponsor for something that involves food or giveaways, and a philanthropic sponsor for one that involves doing more of the policy, environment, and systems change approaches. So this sort of gets to the mission fit idea. If it fits with your organization's mission, it's going to be more successful. There are organizations that get into trouble because in their desire to stay alive, they go after all sorts of different funding sources and sort of lose sight of what their mission is. It can keep people on the payroll for a while, but eventually people start saying, so what is this group, and who are they, and they're so diffuse that they lose their meaning. So the grant opportunities shouldn't drive the mission. The mission should drive what it is that you decide you want, and then you find a funding source that can help with that mission. That's also going to be more appealing to a potential funder, because they see that you have some passion behind what it is that you are interested in doing, what the solution that you're proposing, and probably some expertise and some connections. You can massage what you're suggesting so that it fits what a funder is interested in, but you shouldn't be so far afield that it really, you have to stretch the mission to justify it. So you decided you want to do grant seeking. You want to find potential funders who are going to provide support, and the ones that are consistent with your mission. Then you need to check and see what are their eligibility requirements. So some might require that you have a 501c3 status, and I believe the Heart Association may be a 501c6. So you need to know what type of organization you are. Some might say that they want only organizations that are in a certain geographic area. There's a whole category of foundations that are called hospital conversion foundations. They were created because a community hospital merged, went out of business, and the assets from selling that hospital were turned into a foundation. And that usually the foundation stipulation is that funds must support things that are in the geographic area that hospital had served. There might also be requirements that whoever the funder is can put stipulations on any application, any funding. It's their money. They can decide what they want to do with it. So you need to make sure that whatever it is, if you're not eligible, there's no point spending your time trying to go after it. So places to look, if your organization has a grants office, then they may be able to help you at the national level or locally. The key contacts, remember what we said earlier about circulating widely, getting known in your community. I one time had got a $100,000 grant with basically a 2-page letter because I had cultivated contact. When I first made contact with the person, I didn't know that this was going to result. I wasn't for the purpose of getting a grant. But when that person and I were talking and we saw that there might be some opportunity, then I was invited to apply and said, yeah, we've got the money, just, write a letter, and this is the kind of thing that we probably would be interested in. And so we did. Most of the time it's not that easy. Another thing is to watch the timing of when to apply. As you know, with the grant that you have now, you had application deadlines, so you had to apply by a certain date. Some things are one-time opportunities, and if you miss the deadline, you miss the opportunity. Some are on a rolling application, so they might do quarterly. A lot of foundations might have their board meetings on a quarterly basis, and so they'll accept applications that are due on every quarter so that they're ready to be reviewed when their board meets. Some require a letter of intent first, some do not. So that's something else to check to make sure. A letter of intent often is just one page saying you intend to apply, you expect it to be for about this amount of money, and a very, very brief description of what it is that you might be interested in doing. The one reason that funders sometimes ask for letters of intent is that they want to have some estimate of how many applications they might be receiving. So if they have a review process and they are using a panel of reviewers or external reviewers, they know how many reviewers to solicit. One time I was working on doing a funding where we were providing the funding, we were managing the grant application process. We asked for letters of intent. We got 17,000 letters of intent. And it was like, oh my, how are we going to handle this? We had to really scramble to try to find enough reviewers. It turned out not everyone that sent a letter of intent actually applied, thank goodness. But if we hadn't done that and we started getting swamped by I think it was about 1,000 applications that we did receive, we could not have handled those if we hadn't had the letter of intent, and it would have been a fiasco. So paying attention to that if it's required. So, okay, you've decided you want to do it, you've thought about your mission, you've thought about what the issue is, the problem that you think needs solving, you've thought about what you might want to do. It could be an extension of what you're currently doing. It could be that as a result of the needs assessment that you have done and the coalition that you have gathered, that you have identified some other areas where you think there are opportunities to make a difference in your community, and you are ready to begin to seek some possibilities. There are two really good places to get started if you don't know where else through an internet search. One is the Foundation Center, and one is grants.gov. And I'm going to switch in a minute to show you what is available on each of those sites and a little bit about navigating each one. So the Foundation Center has information from the philanthropic community, from grants that are available from foundations primarily. Grants.gov is our federal grants that are available. I said your state might also have a place where they have local state grants that are available, and that's why it's good to get connected to your state agency to get information about where that might be. So before we go to those sites, let me stop and ask if there are any questions up to this point. I don't hear any questions. No one is speaking up. I don't know if people were unmuted to be able to ask questions or not. If you do have a question, you also can, there's a function where you can, I think, raise your hand. But I'll continue on. So what you see now, this is the home page for the Foundation Center. And I just want to, I don't get any commission from them or anything like that, but I have found it useful. So there is information generally about foundations. They also have some very good training on how to do grants. There is some information that's available free. So you go to the new visitor page and you can see if you're a nonprofit grant seeker, what they have. So they have grant seeking basics for nonprofit organizations. So it's a good little tutorial guide to funding research. If it's research that you're going after versus other things, the libraries, the programs, there's a proposal writing course, how to prepare a proposal, planning, research, cultivation, and a board. So that's a good place to start if you haven't done it. Now, there is a fee. You can pay either just for a month if you just want to have a time that's concentrated time that you're going to really say, okay, we've got our plans, now we want to, right now is when we're going to be looking. You can also have an ongoing subscription. So if you go in there, one of the things you can do is you can search for different things. Now, I am going in at the basic level. There are basic levels and there are higher levels. So this is just the basic level subscription. So one of the things you can do is called Search 990s. So what I did was I created a search, and I said, well, I want to search on health education. The fiscal year, the 990 form is like the equivalent of the tax form that nonprofits fill out. The tax form, like your 1090 that you would do for taxes. So the fiscal year, well, the most recent one that any organization would have done would be 14. They wouldn't have done 15 yet because the year isn't finished. If you know a particular grant maker and you want to look them up, you can do that. If you don't know, I just put in Akron, Ohio, and so I want to do search. So I want to find who in Akron is providing the grants in this area. So I come up with several foundations in the Akron area that would be providing this kind of information. So then I looked up one of them, and what I found here was, if I go to the top here, this was an Albrecht Family Foundation. The kind of information that it gives here, it tells how much money they gave, and continue on down. There's a lot of information. It looks like it's a lot of stuff to look at, but you can get down to several pages down, and you'll find a list of who they funded and how much. So they gave some to the Barbershop Harmony for $500. Well, that probably wouldn't be the kind of thing you would be going after. They did give some to the Boys and Girls Club, gave them $250, $2,500 for general purposes. They were giving some scholarships. They gave things. Now here's the health and wellness one. They gave something to the Y for $1,000. This one was a scholarship to med school, it looks like. So you get an idea of the level of their funding, how much the awards were, for what kind of thing that they were funded, and who they funded. So if you wanted to follow up with, say, the one that was health and wellness, the Y in North Canton, then you could find out what they could talk to them about what they had done. So this is just one organization, but it gives you an idea. Searching, so you can search by content, by the type of thing, by geographic area, by time, by actual name of foundation if you're interested. Now if you get the more, if you pay more to the Foundation Center, you can get higher level searches where you can plug in and get information that's digested a little more than this. But I just wanted to introduce you to what might be available. So now we'll look at grants.gov. This is a place where grants from all sorts of federal agencies are posted. And this is the home page. If you go to grants.gov, there are some updates and information. There is information here to search for grants, to learn about grants. So you could do Grants 101, grant systems, reporting, that kind of thing. But what I'd like to do now is, this is find open grant opportunities. So probably one of the best ways is to go browse by category, and you can say, okay, well, we're interested in health, or are interested in food and nutrition. So we'll look at health. And obviously there were a lot. There were 1,200 or so. So let's narrow it a little bit more. So let's say we want to do a cooperative agreement we want the eligibility would be for a nonprofit. We want it to be in the category of health, which we've already got. We want it to be Health and Human Service agencies, and we're going to divvy that up. Okay, let's just do CDC. Okay, now we've got it limited down to just 3 that are currently available. It tells the posted date, the close date, and these are sort of open ones that are supporting for conferences and scientific meetings. You know, we could look in different ways. We could look under the FDA and see what they had available. So again, the posted dates, the end dates, and these are all fairly open ones also. I think right now with grants.gov, since it's the beginning of the federal fiscal year and there's not a federal budget yet, we're probably not going to see a lot of new ones. Once the federal budget gets passed for fiscal year 16, and then they will start populating with more things that are immediately available, that are the not the ongoing ones, but ones that are specific. If you hear about a grant and you know the funding opportunity number, or if there are keywords that you want to say breastfeeding or something like that, then you could do that also. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So there are other places, but I think that these 2 are probably the most powerful places to get started looking. And although we're going to, the next webinar will be on the writing, I'll just put a couple of ideas. The first one is really important for the grant seeking part of that, of the prospecting. And that is, you should be clear enough about your idea for what you would like to do to be able to fit it on the back of a business card. And often people have all sorts of ideas and they're nebulous, and if you start talking to a potential funder, you're not going to get very far. There have been times that I have been able to do that, and when I met someone at a social event, for instance, and heard that they might have an interest, I can write that on the back of my business card, hand it to them, and I'm sure all of you have been in a situation where you meet somebody and you have something of interest and you say, oh, we'll follow up, and 3 days later you forget what it was that you were going to follow up with them on. If you've done that, written it on the back of the business card, that's a reminder to them and a reminder to you also. So, you know, if you can be that concise, then you really know what it is that you are wanting to do. You can, I mean, obviously expand it with a lot of details, but it should be that clear. You want to focus on how you can contribute to the solution. It's not just, we have this big problem and we need to study it. A lot of times people are not that interested in just funding another study. Showing that this is something urgent. You know, this is something we need to do something about right away. We can't wait 10 years to do that. Facts are important, but often in just getting started and trying to get your idea across to somebody, trying to do some prospecting, having a story is often very helpful. So the success stories that you're working on, again, condensing them to the elevator speech will there might be an opportunity on the elevator to get somebody's attention. Diagnosing the problem, not just saying, oh, we have a problem, but, is there something underlying it that's where you want to be addressing? And knowing what's current in the field. Having reviewed a lot of grants, I will tell you that if I read an application for something, and the people who are writing it are wanting to do something that's already been done, don't seem to be aware of what is well known in the field. I have found people often have this great idea that they think no one has ever thought of before, but probably someone has. So, you really need to make sure you know what is out there and what is current, what is a good idea. I was at a meeting on Monday on children's safety, and somebody in the room said, how many of you know about Mr. Yuck stickers? And everybody raised their hand. And how many think that they work? Nobody raised their hand. But there are still people out there using Mr. Yuck stickers as their poisoning prevention intervention. Well, there are similar things in the field of the chronic disease prevention that, have great, advocates, but might not be working. So knowing what it is that is the best practice at this point. So just conclude with a little quote from Alice in Wonderland from Lewis Carroll, where the March Hare said, you should say what you mean. And Alice said, oh, I do. I mean what I say. Oh, that's the same thing. Oh, not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. Why, you might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as saying I eat what I see. So the point of this is being clear on what it is that you want to do, what the connection is between problem and a solution, about how you can contribute, about how that links with your mission, about why you should be the one funded to do this versus somebody else, and about how that fits with the funder's mission. So researching the funder a little bit and finding out what they're interested in. And I mentioned briefly philanthropic, and I think on the first side I said corporate. Don't ignore corporate. I know that, for instance, Target will provide small funding in communities. Some of the drugstores have Rite Aid and CVS do local kinds of things. Walmart does local things. You go, sometimes I think Target actually has like a little brochure in the store with an application. Sometimes it's a matter of talking to the store manager to see if they fund anything in your community. And particularly if it's something where you might use a product of theirs, sometimes they will donate the materials if it's something that could be helpful to what you're doing. Sometimes a grocery chain might donate food for an event. So, it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst that can happen is that someone can say no. So with that, I will open it for questions for your experiences with grant seeking and any comments. So can we unmute people, please?
Okay, Susan, I'm checking down to see if I can. Okay. I'm unmuting lines now. If folks have a question, they can either raise your hand, or if you'd like, you can type your comment or your question into the chat box at the bottom, or the question box at the bottom of your control panel, which is located to the right of your screen. So Susan, while we're waiting for any questions that we might have from the group, one of the things that you had mentioned was kind of trying to find out what's out there in terms of who's funding what funders are interested in, and what types of things have already been funded. Given that a lot of the folks on the line are already working within multi-sectoral coalitions with other organizations, what advice would you offer to them for either ways to exchange information or collaborate for new grants, or even getting information about other opportunities that are out there?
Supported financially. Oh, I think I was muted. When you're with your partners, finding out what they are doing beyond your project and where the source of funding is very important. Sometimes they will be able to make introductions to you to a funding source. And that's certainly one of the great places to find out and to share information. Often that's how you can get on lists of, there may be lists about what funding is available when new grants come out. And so that's an excellent place to get started. And when we said to involve the people who will be affected or the groups that will be affected, often also that your partners are a great place to start with that, with making sure that they are engaged if you think that this is something that you can continue to work together on. And don't be shy about suggesting. Sometimes you might be the one receiving the direct funding, other times they might be, but to ask that you be included in what they're doing, or ask how can they continue to support it. They might be willing, for instance, one of your partners might be willing to provide some staff support to keeping a coalition going, or to helping to fund a project that the coalition wants to do. If it's one that truly comes out of the coalition of a priority, often the resources will become available because they are invested in it. It's coming from them.
Okay, and just a reminder to folks, if you have questions, you can either type it into the box or raise your hand. And if you don't have any questions on this call, just a reminder, we do have a part 2, which will focus a little bit more on the grant writing portion. But if you think of additional questions, we can make Susan's contact information available, or if you have other questions, please come to the November 12th webinar with those questions prepared as well. Okay, seeing no other questions at this time, I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today. Again, I'd like to thank all of you for your time on today's webinar. I hope the information presented will be useful to you. We will send out a link to the archived slides and also the recording of today's webinar, as well as some of the links that Susan went over in her presentation today. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thank you again.